The howling wind felt alive that night, like something ancient and angry prowling the Montana plains. Maxine Max Parker squinted through the blizzard, her patrol car creeping along a deserted farm road. Snow battered the windshield in wild, slashing sheets. Each gust rattled the frame. The world outside was a swirling white void broken only by the faint beam of her headlights and a half-lit ranch sign flickering in the distance. She was supposed to be heading home, but home was just a word lately. A rented farmhouse stuffed with silence and the ghosts of what used to be. Max's gloved hands were tight on the steering wheel. Her mind drifted to old wounds, to the partner she'd lost last spring, and the horse they'd ridden together on those community days that everyone in the department used to tease them about. Even now, the memory cut sharper than the wind. That's when she saw it, a shape slumped against the fence line, barely visible through the sheets of snow. At first she thought it was just a pile of mud or an abandoned blanket, but the headlights swept across something that made her pulse skip. A horse, caked in filth and shivering so violently it looked ready to collapse. Max slammed the brakes, heart hammering, tires skidding sideways until she was close enough to see the truth. The mare was a mess. Her coat was mottled brown, patchy and smeared with old blood and mud. Tangled barbed wire snared one leg, biting deep enough to draw fresh crimson. An old leather halter hung crooked on her head, battered and near useless. The horse's eyes rolled in fear, one clouded over with the haze of a past injury. Her breath came in short, desperate puffs that steamed into the freezing air. Max climbed out, boots crunching on ice. The cold punched through every layer. She hesitated, every instinct screaming procedure. Call animal control, keep your distance, stay safe. But something inside her refused. She heard her late partner's voice, that stubborn lilt. "Don't just stand there, Max. Do something good." She moved in slow, hands raised. "Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." The wind tore her words away. The horse struggled, hooves scraping, but was too exhausted to run. Max knelt, jaw clenched against the cold, and began to untangle the wire. It took time, her fingers stiff, the metal biting, the mare shuddering at every movement. Once free, the horse collapsed to her knees with a soft grunt, eyes flickering shut. Max ran her hand gently down the mare's trembling neck and felt the ridge of old scars, so many stories written in flesh. That's when she noticed the tag, a worn brass disc on the halter, stamped with the name Juniper, retired trail horse. It rattled softly as she moved, a strange comfort in the storm. Should she call it in? Wait for backup? But the blizzard was getting worse, and every second cost this horse a little more life. Max made a choice. She jogged back to the truck, fetched a blanket from the trunk, and with careful, halting motions managed to coax Juniper up, leaning her heavy head against Max's shoulder as if the weight of trust was almost too much. Together they stumbled through the snow, Max fighting the urge to cry with relief each time the mare moved. She managed, somehow, to lift Juniper into the bed of the truck. The horse's breath steamed against the glass, fogging Max's rear view as she slammed the tailgate shut. The drive back was a fever dream of worry. The roads were slick, the snow relentless. Every bump sent a jolt of pain through the wounded animal. Max kept glancing into the mirror, half afraid the mare would collapse, half afraid of what she'd just done. As they pulled into the barn behind Max's house, she saw the old structure in a new light. Shadows leaped along the walls as she flipped the lantern on. The place smelled of hay, leather, and cold earth. She guided Juniper inside, stumbling a little herself, and laid her down in a makeshift stall. Her hands were trembling, part fear, part adrenaline, part something deeper she couldn't name. Max knelt beside the horse, brushing ice crystals from her mane. "You made it," she whispered. The mare's eyes fluttered open, glassy but alive. For the briefest moment, Juniper pressed her nose against Max's chest, a trembling, fragile gesture that spoke more than words ever could. Out in the storm, sirens wailed in the distance. Max was supposed to call this in, follow every rule in the book. But tonight, she'd made a different kind of choice, one that would change everything. As she shut the barn doors against the wind, Max looked back at Juniper, this battered, broken animal whose very presence raised 100 questions. Who left you here? What secrets are you running from? And most haunting of all, what kind of person abandons a soul in a storm? Max didn't have answers. But as the blizzard howled and the lantern guttered, one thing was certain: neither of them would face the night alone. The storm raged for hours, beating on the tin roof like 1,000 fists. Inside the barn, the world felt hushed and suspended, a bubble of weak yellow lantern light, sharp smells of iodine and saddle oil, the shuddering breath of a horse and the deeper tremors in Max's own chest. She moved slowly, every motion deliberate, as she peeled away layers of mud and ice from Juniper's body. The mare flinched at every touch, retreating as far into the stall as the old boards would allow. Max worked in silence, her mind drifting through the echoes of her own memories, each one colder than the night air. She remembered other rescues, other nights spent in barns, and how she and her late partner, Derek, would laugh as they mucked stalls after a long shift. Now, the only laughter was in her memory, sharp as the wind outside. Max blinked back tears, her breath shaking. She forced herself to focus. With gentle hands, she examined Juniper's wounds, rope scars around the pasterns, deep and angry, half hidden beneath matted hair. A fresh bullet graze along the left shoulder, still seeping a little blood despite the cold. On the mare's flank, under layers of grime, a faded cattle brand, RB07. Max's brow furrowed. There was a story here, one not written in any police report. The old barn creaked and moaned as the wind picked up. Max glanced around, feeling the weight of the place. The lantern's glow made the dust motes swirl like tiny ghosts. The hayloft overhead was full of cobwebs and shadows. The stalls were empty except for a few broken tools and a saddle hanging on the wall, its leather dry and cracked from years of neglect. This was where she'd ended up, haunted by memories, hiding from the world, tending to lost things. Juniper eyed her warily, muscles taut, as if expecting another round of pain. Max knelt down, offering her a carrot. The mare stared, nostrils flaring but wouldn't come closer. Max laid the carrot on the stall floor, stood back and waited. Minutes passed. Finally, Juniper edged forward and took it with a quick, uncertain bite, then retreated again. A wave of something warm flickered in Max's chest. She took a slow breath. "You're safe now," she said, voice thick. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." But safety was just a word. Underneath, both woman and horse were a tangled mess of old scars. As the night dragged on, Max cleaned and bandaged Juniper's wounds as best she could. The bullet graze worried her. She made a mental note to call Dr. Kim, the local vet, in the morning. For now, she wrapped the wound and pressed gently, whispering nonsense the way her mother used to when Max was a scared little girl. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket, one bar of reception. She checked for messages, none from anyone who mattered. Feeling hollow, she opened her laptop, propping it on a bale of hay. She typed RB07 Cattle Brand, Montana into the search bar, not really expecting much. A few minutes later, she found it. A record of a family ranch outside Butte, destroyed in a fire 5 years ago. It had belonged to the Boylan family, their prized trail horse, Juniper. Max read on, her pulse quickening. The fire had made headlines mostly for the tragedy. Not only did the Boylans lose their home, but 2 foster children living at the ranch had vanished the same night. The investigation had gone cold. The mare Juniper had never been seen again, until tonight. Max's heart pounded. Was it possible? This battered horse, here in her barn, was a living witness to secrets no one else could tell. She stared at Juniper, whose large brown eyes, one clouded, one keen, regarded her with something like challenge. As dawn approached, Max's exhaustion caught up with her. She sat on a bale, elbows on her knees, staring into the dim light. Her mind spun with questions. Who would do this to a horse? Was Juniper running from someone or leading her to something she'd missed? A sharp knock rattled the barn door. Max jerked upright, all nerves. She opened it a crack, expecting maybe a neighbor or the vet. Instead, there was nothing but a folded piece of paper on the frozen stoop. No footprints, no sound but the wind. She picked it up. In neat block letters, the note read, "Ask about the 2016 ranch files. Trust Juniper." Max shivered, not from cold, but from the sudden sense that she was being watched. She scanned the darkness, but the snow was falling thick, covering any sign of a visitor. Back inside, Max settled into the old camp chair by Juniper's stall, the note gripped tightly in her hand. She watched the horse for a long time, thoughts racing. She remembered the last time she'd trusted her instincts, the last time she'd bent the rules for something or someone who couldn't speak for themselves. It hadn't ended well. Derek was gone, and she was left with scars and silence. But Juniper wasn't Derek, and maybe this was the universe's strange way of giving her one more chance to do something right. As the sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow in blue and gold, Max saw Juniper shuffle to her feet and stand, shaky but proud. She reached out, hand open. This time, when she offered another carrot, Juniper's lips brushed her palm, and for a heartbeat, trust flickered between them. A new day had begun, but for Max and Juniper, it felt like something bigger, a beginning and an old story colliding, secrets hidden in scars and silence, and the fragile, hopeful promise that together they might find answers neither could face alone. The blizzard eased off, leaving behind a world remade in white silence. For days, the snow piled against Max's barn doors, trapping her in a suspended limbo. The outside world faded. No calls from the department, no interruptions except the slow, ceaseless tick of time. She told herself it was only until she was cleared to return to work. But truth was, Max didn't want to leave the barn. Not now. Not with Juniper here, the only living thing who seemed as lost as she did. Inside, the barn was a small universe of routine and memory. Each morning, Max would stoke the old wood stove, its heat barely enough to chase away the chill. The air was thick with the scent of hay, saddle soap, and the deep, earthy musk of horse sweat. She swept the aisles, humming bits of old trail songs, just to fill the emptiness. Juniper stood quietly in her stall, always watching, always listening, flinching at every distant noise. Their relationship began with distance, a delicate waltz between strangers both battered by their pasts. Max spent hours just sitting, notebook on her knees, sketching the patterns of Juniper's scars or the way the morning light caught in her mane. Sometimes she'd talk, voice low and unhurried, spinning out stories about her childhood on the edge of the Bitterroot, about her first Palomino gelding who'd bucked her into a mud puddle, about the partner she'd lost and the guilt that wouldn't let go. Some days the words came out in a flood. Other days she was silent, her thoughts tight and aching. One night, under the hush of falling snow, Max broke down completely. She sat on the floor of Juniper's stall, back against the rough boards, tears streaming silently into the horse's tangled mane. She pressed her forehead against the warm curve of Juniper's neck, feeling the steady thrum of life under battered skin. For a moment, Juniper didn't flinch away. She simply stood there, breathing slow and deep, sharing her quiet strength. In that shared silence, something shifted. It started with small gestures. Juniper allowed Max to brush her coat, slow and patient, untangling knots and smoothing down mud-stiffened hair. Max discovered more hidden scars, along Juniper's legs, across her chest, even a notch missing from her right ear. Each mark told a story, and Max listened with her hands, piecing together a history that no one had ever written down. Some afternoons, Max would find herself humming half-remembered lullabies her mother used to sing. The sound seemed to settle Juniper, whose eyelids drooped and ears flicked in time with the tune. The world narrowed to the rhythm of the brush, the warmth of lamplight, and the steady, grounding presence of another living being. Yet even as trust bloomed, Max's mind kept circling the mystery. Why had someone gone to so much trouble to hurt and then abandon this horse? What happened at that ranch 5 years ago, and what did Juniper know that was worth hiding? One afternoon, sorting through Juniper's halter bag for a clean rag, Max's fingers closed around something unexpected. A small, creased photograph tucked deep in a corner. She unfolded it with trembling hands. The picture was faded, colors sun-bleached and corners worn. In it, a much younger Juniper stood in the sunlight, flanked by two people, her late partner Derek smiling, arms slung over the saddle horn, and a girl Max didn't recognize. The girl's face was half hidden under a cowboy hat, her smile bright and easy. Both reached out to Juniper, who looked calm and proud, every inch the prized trail horse she once was. Max stared at the photo, heart pounding. Derek had never talked about this girl, not once. And yet here they were, all three together, like some message from the past delivered just when Max needed it most. She turned the photo over. There was a date, barely legible, May 2016. Below that, a single word, family. That night, Max lay awake in the hayloft, the photo pressed to her chest. Questions gnawed at her. Who was the girl? Was she one of the missing foster children? Why had Derek kept this from her? And how had Juniper ended up abandoned and scarred while the world moved on? The days passed slow and soft. Outside, the wind howled and the drifts grew deeper, but inside, trust was growing, a fragile seed pushing through the dark. Juniper began to meet Max's gaze without flinching, even nickering softly when Max entered the barn at dusk. Once, when thunder rattled the roof, Juniper pressed her body against Max's, both trembling, each taking comfort in the other's nearness. Sometimes Max would catch Juniper staring at the barn door, ears pricked, as if waiting for someone to return. And every time Max's thoughts drifted to Derek or the mysterious girl in the photo, Juniper seemed to sense her grief, coming closer, standing steady, her breath a gentle anchor in the storm. The boundary between past and present blurred. Max couldn't escape the feeling that Juniper wasn't just a victim, but a witness, maybe even a protector, tied to secrets she couldn't voice. The questions grew sharper. What really happened at the Boylan Ranch? Who vanished that night? And why did it feel sometimes as if Juniper's whole reason for surviving was to help Max find the answers she'd been running from? With every day, the silence between woman and horse became less a wall and more a bridge. They were both haunted, both searching, both battered by memories that wouldn't heal. But in the quiet barn, with snow piled high against the doors and hope flickering in the lamplight, Max began to believe that together they might unravel the truth and find a way back to themselves. A pale blue morning broke over Butte, Montana, the snow blanketing everything in muffled quiet. Max stared out her frosted kitchen window, coffee cooling in her hand, the photograph of Derek and the unknown girl propped against a chipped sugar bowl. Last night's dreams had been a storm of blurred faces and galloping hooves, of fire flickering behind barn doors and voices calling names Max didn't know. She'd woken with her heart racing, pulse still tangled in the mysteries she couldn't let go. Today, Max was supposed to rest. Her department's psychological review was just a polite way of telling her she wasn't ready for the street. Maybe she wasn't. Still, sitting idle while questions burned was never her way. She owed it to Derek, to the children whose names had vanished from the record, and to Juniper, now dozing in a shaft of light in the barn, muzzle twitching as she dreamed. Determined, Max grabbed the photo and slipped on her battered coat. The snow was crusted, squeaking under her boots as she crossed the yard to the neighbor's house. Jess Chen, 24 and new to Montana, was scraping ice from her old Subaru with a red plastic spatula. Jess was an amateur genealogist, and more importantly, Max's only friend out here who didn't treat her like broken glass. Jess looked up, saw the worry in Max's eyes, and fell in step without a word. They spent the morning in the drafty courthouse basement, where the air smelled of mildew and the walls were lined with dusty binders and yellowing files. Max spread out the photograph, Derek's badge number, and a list of names she'd pulled from the Boylan Ranch's public tax records. As they poured through county ledgers, property records, and old newspaper clippings, the shape of the past began to emerge. The Boylan Ranch had been a safe haven for foster kids, some placed by court order, others left behind by families in trouble. After the fire, two names appeared again and again in the files, Sarah Mayfield and Connor Bright. Both had been declared missing, both listed as presumed runaways. Officially, the case had gone cold. No follow-up, no press. Just another heartbreak lost to the system. Jess found a faded page in a 2016 sheriff's report. It mentioned Juniper by name, trusted horse, gentle with children, last seen near the north fence the night of the fire. After that, nothing. Back at the ranch, Max sat in the barn, sorting through what they'd learned. She read the same lines again and again, fingers tracing the curve of Juniper's neck. The mare followed her with solemn eyes, always lingering near but never crowding. Every now and then, Juniper would twitch or startle when footsteps approached, but she never bolted from Max, not anymore. The sense of isolation pressed in on Max. Every noise from the empty pasture, every creak of the barn made her pulse jump. Max felt split between the present, cold, lonely, uncertain, and the past which tugged at her with 1,000 silent questions. Was she chasing ghosts, or was there still hope for the missing children? Jess brought over a thermos of sweet coffee and settled onto a hay bale. "You ever think Juniper's afraid of more than just old pain?" she asked quietly, glancing at the mare. Max nodded. "Some wounds don't heal easy." She paused, then added, "I think she remembers, maybe more than we do." That night, Max dreamed again. She was a little girl, lost in smoke and fire, calling out for help as shapes moved in the darkness. The sound of hooves echoed behind her, steady and sure, and then suddenly she was lifted, carried to safety by a brown mare with a white blaze, Juniper, ageless, guiding her through the flames. She woke with a jolt, sweat dampening her shirt. She padded out to the barn in her slippers, drawn by a sound she couldn't name. Juniper stood at the stall door, wide awake, ears flicked forward, staring into the shadows. Max pressed her forehead to the horses, steadying her breath. "We're in this together, aren't we?" she whispered. Days bled into each other. Max fell into a routine of checking old files online, calling the state social services, tracing names through half-remembered conversations with former ranch staff. Most of the leads ended in dead ends or silence, people who had moved, died, or simply didn't want to remember. But every so often, Juniper gave her a sign. One afternoon, when Jess stopped by with fresh oats, Juniper shied hard at the sound of a pickup rattling down the road. More than fear, it was panic. She kicked the stall gate, whinnying until Max stood by her side, stroking her neck until she calmed. Max peered through the slats and watched as the new county sheriff, a tall, heavy-set man with cold blue eyes, cruised past, slowing just long enough to tip his hat at the barn. Jess whispered, "He gives me the creeps." Max nodded, unease growing in her gut. That night she combed back through every mention of the sheriff's name in the files but found nothing except a long family history in the area. Still, the way Juniper tensed, the way her hooves trembled, was enough for Max to make a silent promise. Whatever happened, she'd protect this horse, and she'd get to the bottom of what happened at the Boylan Ranch. Max finally reached an old foster coordinator, Maggie Flynn, who had placed kids at the ranch years ago. Over the phone, Maggie's voice was warm but cautious. She said, "Those children, some of them were running from more than just bad homes. Some were running from the people supposed to help." Max pressed for details, but Maggie clammed up. "I shouldn't talk on the phone. Some folks don't want the past dug up." After the call, Max sat with Juniper in the quiet barn, the snow falling in slow sheets outside, the only sound Juniper's steady breathing and the distant wind. She looked at the horse, scarred, brave, still standing, and vowed, "I'll protect you, and I'll find the truth. I promise." That night, for the first time since the blizzard, Max felt something like hope stirring, a faint but insistent warmth, growing stronger with every beat of Juniper's steady heart. The power went out just past midnight, plunging Max's world into a dark so thick it felt alive. The only light came from the moon, pale and uncertain through snow-caked windows. The wind had died down, leaving behind a deep, uneasy quiet that pressed against the walls of the house and crept beneath Max's skin. She fumbled for a flashlight, her breath fogging as she pulled on her boots, driven by the old, anxious instinct to check the barn first. As she trudged across the yard, the snow crunched like shattered glass underfoot. The barn loomed up, hulking and silent, its lanterns all dead. But before Max could reach the doors, she heard it, a frantic banging, hooves drumming against wood, a desperate, high-pitched whinny that sent a cold ripple down her spine. She burst inside, flashlight beam jittering wildly over the stalls. Juniper was in a frenzy, pawing and circling her enclosure, eyes wide and wild. Max rushed to her, heart pounding. "Easy, girl. I'm here." But Juniper wouldn't calm, not even at Max's touch. Instead, the mare pressed her head hard against the gate, nostrils flaring, muscles quivering with purpose. Max recognized the look, something urgent, something more than fear. She remembered stories from old ranchers, the way a good horse could sense danger, could lead you through storm or fire if only you trusted her. That instinct flared up in Max, overriding doubt. She undid the latch. Juniper surged out, snorting steam in the frigid air, and trotted straight past Max, out into the swirling, moonlit pasture. Max followed, boots slipping, heart hammering. She called after Juniper, but the mare was relentless, making for the old fence line at the edge of the property, past the dead cottonwoods and half-buried gates. The snow swallowed sound, and for a moment Max lost sight of her, panic scraping her raw. Then she spotted Juniper, pawing fiercely at a drift near a fallen fence post. Max stumbled to her side, dropped to her knees in the snow, and began digging with numb hands. Her breath came in gasps. The earth was frozen, her fingers clumsy, but together, woman and horse, they unearthed a battered tin box, crusted in mud and rust. Max carried it back to the barn, Juniper trailing at her heels, suddenly calm as if her duty was done. Inside, by the light of her phone screen, Max pried open the lid. Inside the box were three things: a child's faded red bandana, stiff with age, a slim, leather-bound logbook stamped with the Boylan Ranch brand, RB07, and a folded sheet of paper, fragile as old lace, with a simple pencil sketch of a horse, unmistakably Juniper, beneath the initials SM and CB. Max's hands shook as she opened the logbook. The first few pages were everyday ranch notes, feed schedules, vet visits, the kinds of details that marked an ordinary life. But deeper in, Max found a list of initials and short notes beside each. SM, afraid of thunder, loves cinnamon rolls. CB, night terrors, trusts Juniper. The last entries were hurried, words slanting wild. Smoke tonight, Juniper restless, children packed bags. If anything happens... Max swallowed hard, fighting a surge of grief and anger. This was evidence. Proof that at least some of the children hadn't just vanished. They'd tried to escape, to survive. She turned to the folded sheet. On the back was a hand-drawn map, crude but clear, showing the edge of the property, the woods, and a small X marked beyond the north fence. Written beside it, outbuilding. If we make it, we'll wait for help. Max stared at the map, heart racing. She thought of Sarah and Connor, the missing kids, the way Juniper had led her here. Was it possible that all these years the mare had remembered where the children had tried to hide, and had someone else been looking for them too? Just then, a car's headlight swept briefly across the pasture, making Max duck instinctively. The light vanished as quickly as it came, but her nerves were on fire now. Someone else was out there, maybe watching, maybe waiting. In the barn, Juniper rested her nose on Max's shoulder, calm at last. Max stroked her mane, whispering, "You did good, girl. We'll figure this out." As the adrenaline faded, Max sat back on her heels, mind reeling. This was more than an abandoned horse or a forgotten fire. This was a living trail of secrets, one that Juniper had carried with her for years, waiting for the right person to listen, to trust. Jess arrived early that morning, breath steaming in the dawn, and found Max poring over the logbook by lantern light. Together, they examined every clue. Jess's eyes went wide when Max showed her the map. "We should check it out," she whispered. "But it could be dangerous." Max nodded, determination settling in her bones. "We owe it to them, to all of them. But we'll be careful." She looked at Juniper, who watched them both, eyes bright and steady. Before heading back inside, Max scrawled a question on a notepad and left it on the kitchen table for herself for anyone who might be listening. "If you were in my shoes, grieving, scared, but suddenly holding a key to a lost story, would you risk everything to follow where a broken old horse leads? Or would you stay safe, let the past stay buried? What would you do?" As the sun finally rose, glinting off the barn's battered windows, Max made her decision. She would follow Juniper. She would find the truth, no matter what secrets waited in the snow. But in her gut she knew this was only the beginning. The real danger, the real answers still waited out in the woods, in the shadows of old crimes and older loyalty. And at the heart of it all was a horse, one who refused to forget and who trusted Max to see it through. Snow crunched beneath Max's boots as she trudged up the narrow sidewalk to the faded green bungalow at the edge of town. Her breath plumed in the morning air, nerves tight as guitar strings. Jess trailed behind her, hands jammed in her coat pockets, eyes flicking warily over every passing car. They'd waited until the sun was up and the roads were plowed before heading out, both unsettled by the memory of headlights sweeping across Max's property in the dark. Inside the bungalow, Maggie Flynn waited. She opened the door just as Max raised her hand to knock, as if she'd been watching from the window. Maggie was in her 70s, with a halo of white hair and sharp eyes that had seen more than their share of sorrow. The living room was cluttered with houseplants and old photographs, kids grinning atop horses, family barbecues, a younger Maggie posing with ranchers long since gone. Maggie poured them coffee and ushered them to a creaky sofa. She didn't waste time on small talk. "You're here about Boylan Ranch," she said, voice flat as the winter prairie. Max nodded, sliding the photo across the table. "Do you know these kids, or this horse?" Maggie studied the image for a long moment. "That's Juniper, all right. Best trail horse I ever placed." The kids, Sarah Mayfield and Connor Bright, they were tough but good hearts. The fire, it broke us all. Her voice caught, and she sipped her coffee to steady herself. Jess leaned forward. "What about the sheriff's family?" "There are rumors. Bank records. Hush money. Kids going missing." Maggie's eyes narrowed. "The old sheriff. His brother owned the Boylan land before the Boylans bought it cheap, after a string of foreclosures. That family never liked outsiders poking around. After the fire, it was all swept under the rug. I heard things about abuse, about children running away, about someone in a badge making it all disappear. But folks get scared, especially out here. They mind their business." Max felt a cold knot tighten in her chest. "Do you think Sarah and Connor made it out? Could they be alive?" Maggie hesitated. If anyone could help them, it was Juniper. That mare was smarter than some people. She'd kick down a fence to keep a kid safe. I always thought, if the horse was missing too, maybe she led them away. The living room clock ticked loud in the silence. Max's mind raced through what she knew. Kids vanished, a horse gone, a sheriff's family with too many secrets, and a trail gone cold for years. All that time, Juniper wandering, waiting for someone to listen. Maggie slid a slip of paper across the table. "I shouldn't do this, but I never slept right knowing what might have happened. Here's the number for an old deputy who worked the case. He retired after the fire. Said he'd seen too much. Maybe he'll talk to you." Back outside, the sky was a bruised gray, wind sharp as a knife. Jess was quiet, head bowed, as they trudged back to the car. "They're hiding something," she murmured. "And now, we're stirring it up." Before Max could answer, a dark pickup truck pulled out from behind a stand of pines and idled at the curb. The windows were tinted. Max's nerves sang with danger. Jess pulled out her phone, snapping a picture as subtly as she could. The truck crawled past, the driver's face in shadow, but Max caught a glint of the sheriff's badge on the dashboard, the sheriff himself. He slowed, rolled down the window, just enough for his icy blue eyes to meet Max's. "You girls lost?" he asked, a hint of a smile twisting his mouth. "Just following up on a missing horse," Max replied, voice steady. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about the Boylan fire, would you?" The sheriff's smile vanished. "That was before my time. Old history. Best let sleeping dogs lie." He drove off without another word, tires spitting gravel. Jess shivered. He's not going to let this go. They got in the car, hearts racing. Max called the retired deputy, Joe Talbot, who answered on the second ring, his voice a gravelly whisper. He agreed to meet them at a diner on the edge of town. Joe was in his 60s, red-faced, hands still bearing the thick calluses of ranch work. He recognized Juniper's name instantly, and his eyes softened with memory. "That horse," he said, "saved more than one life, I'll tell you that." He leaned in, voice low. "After the fire, we found tracks in the snow, small feet, horse hooves leading into the woods. But by the time search parties got organized, it snowed hard and wiped out every trace. Sheriff's family, his brother and father, pushed to close the file. Said the kids ran away. I never bought it. Heard later Juniper was seen near a logging road weeks later, alone, half-starved. Then nothing. Jess slid the logbook across the table. Joe flipped through, nodding grimly at the initials and the frantic notes. That's Sarah and Connor. If you found this, you're already in deep. Be careful. People who ask too many questions have a way of ending up in ditches out here. Back at the ranch, Max and Jess reviewed everything. Jess worked through the logbook, eyes scanning for patterns. Suddenly she looked up. There's an encrypted entry, dates and names, but they repeat in a weird order. I think it's a code. She typed furiously at her laptop. After an hour, she cracked it. Juniper led Sarah and Connor to the outbuilding. They survived the fire. They escaped, never found. Juniper, in the stall, nickered softly, sensing the change in the room. Max walked over, laying a hand on the mare's scarred shoulder. You did it, girl. You really did. But outside, the world grew darker. The sheriff was circling. Someone didn't want the past unearthed. The stakes were suddenly higher than ever, and Max knew the next step could cost them everything. But she also knew this. She and Juniper had come too far to stop now. Night fell heavy over the ranch, moonlight glinting off the hard-packed snow. Max stood at her window watching the tree line. The sheriff's truck had made 2 slow passes since dusk, headlights sweeping over the barn like a searchlight. Each time Max's heart hammered with dread and with resolve. The sense of being hunted grew stronger, but she refused to let fear swallow her. Inside the barn, Juniper was restless, pacing her stall. The logbook and map, decoded and clutched in Max's hands, pointed to the outbuilding deep in the woods, the place where Sarah and Connor might have hidden, the last hope of finding the truth. Jess zipped up her parka, determination hardening her features. If we wait, they'll cover their tracks. Tonight's the night, Max. Max nodded, swallowing her fear. She saddled Juniper slowly, mindful of the mare's old wounds, whispering reassurance with every buckle and strap. Juniper's breath misted in the frigid air, but she stood steady, ears pricked, ready to lead. Jess shouldered a backpack stuffed with a first aid kit, flashlight, camera, and the logbook. They slipped from the barn's shadow into the frozen night, their footsteps muffled by the new snow. The woods closed around them, silent but for the crunch of boots and the muffled snort of Juniper as she forged ahead. Max let the horse guide them, trusting her memory more than any map. The cold bit deep, stinging exposed skin, but adrenaline burned hotter with every step into the darkness. Every so often, Juniper would pause, ears swiveling, nose raised to catch scents on the breeze. Jess whispered, "She knows where she's going, doesn't she?" Max only nodded, hand pressed to Juniper's neck, feeling the pulse of trust between them. Half an hour in, the path narrowed, branches scraping their jackets, snow falling in soft clumps from the boughs above. Suddenly, Juniper stopped dead, muscles tensing. Max froze, then heard it too, the unmistakable growl of a truck engine behind them, tires grinding over frozen ruts. Jess's eyes widened. "He's following us." Max pulled them into a thicket, holding her breath as headlights swept across the trees. The sheriff's truck rolled by, moving slow, searching. He didn't see them, yet. When the lights faded, Max pressed her forehead to Juniper's mane. "We keep moving." They stumbled on, deeper into the woods, until Juniper led them to a clearing marked by a collapsed fence and a half-buried metal shed. The roof sagged under the weight of snow. Max's flashlight caught the glint of rusted hinges and the RB07 brand scorched into the door. The place was real. Her heart thudded with hope and dread. They found the door frozen shut, but together, Jess tugging, Max pushing, Juniper nosing at the crack, they wrenched it open. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust motes floated in the beam of their flashlights. Along the back wall, they found 2 makeshift beds, old hay and moth-eaten blankets, plus a scattering of small shoes and faded children's clothes. Jess's breath hitched as she snapped photos. Max's flashlight flickered over a battered shoebox tucked behind a crate. Inside, she found a pile of letters, childish handwriting, sketches of horses, notes dated from just after the fire. "We're okay. Juniper keeps us warm. Waiting for help. Love, SC. Tears stung Max's eyes. They were alive, she whispered. They survived, for a while at least. Then, a crunch outside, boots on snow. Max's blood ran cold. The sheriff's voice boomed out hard and flat. Nobody move. Step outside, hands where I can see 'em. He stood in the doorway, pistol drawn, eyes wild. I warned you, Sergeant. Some stories are better left buried. His gaze flicked to Juniper and then to Jess. And you, poking around where you don't belong. Jess raised her hands, voice shaking. We just want the truth. About the kids, about what happened here. The sheriff's finger tightened on the trigger. Those kids ran off. The horse led 'em out here to die. No one could have saved them. Max stepped forward, voice fierce. You're lying. The logbook, the letters, they tell a different story. Your family hid the truth, buried what you did to those kids. The sheriff's face twisted in anger. He aimed at Max. In that moment, Juniper surged forward with sudden power, ramming into his side. The sheriff stumbled, firing a wild shot into the ceiling. Max tackled him, knocking the pistol aside. Jess kicked it across the floor. For a heartbeat, all was chaos. Shouting, hoofbeats, the sheriff cursing as he struggled beneath Max's grip. But Juniper planted herself protectively between Jess and the man, her eyes fierce, every muscle quivering with purpose. Jess called 911, voice trembling but clear. Officer down, shots fired. We need backup, now. It took only minutes, though it felt like hours, before the wail of sirens split the woods. Deputies burst in, guns drawn, and cuffed the sheriff. He spat curses, fighting them every step. Max sagged against the wall, dizzy with relief and adrenaline. As the officers led the sheriff away, Max hugged Jess, both shaking with cold and shock. Juniper stood quietly, nose pressed to Max's shoulder. A silent thank you, a promise kept. They gave their statements, turned over the evidence, and watched as the truth, hidden for years, began to unfurl in the headlights of police cruisers. The missing children's story would finally be told, and Juniper, scarred, brave, undaunted, was at the center of it all. Later, as dawn crept over the woods, Max stroked Juniper's neck, voice hoarse. You saved them, girl. You saved us all. Juniper nickered softly, breath warm in the frigid air, and for the first time in years, Max let herself believe in hope. The news of the sheriff's arrest tore through Butte like wildfire. Small towns had long memories and quick tongues. By noon, the courthouse lawn was choked with television vans and locals whispering over steaming thermoses. Max felt the weight of every stare as she crossed the parking lot. Juniper's lead rope coiled in her hand, Jess striding at her side. They'd been summoned for a hearing to determine Juniper's fate. The mayor, now infamous as the key to the Boylan case, stood quietly by Max's side, nostrils flaring at the sharp tang of winter. Reporters jostled for photos, their lenses tracking every twitch of Juniper's ears, every shadow crossing Max's face. Inside, the fluorescent-lit courtroom buzzed with tension, a patchwork of ranchers, foster parents, and even a few children who had once called the Boylan Ranch home. The presiding judge, a gray-bearded man with gentle eyes, called the room to order. The first matter, Juniper's legal ownership. A distant cousin of the Boylans, a woman named Evelyn with a tight smile and city shoes, claimed she was entitled to the horse and whatever reward money came with her. Max's chest burned with indignation. Juniper was no prize, no commodity to be sold off. Jess leaned over, voice urgent. You have to speak for her, Max. She's earned the right to choose. When Max was called to the stand, her hands trembled, but her voice rang clear. She told the whole story, how Juniper had been found, how she'd guided Max to the buried evidence, how she'd saved lives at the risk of her own. She described the scars, the nightmares, the trust built one shaky breath at a time. She's more than property, Max finished, voice rough with emotion. She's a survivor. She's family. The judge listened, eyes grave and kind. After deliberation, he made an unusual ruling. I've seen many things in this courtroom, but never a case quite like this. Juniper has, by all accounts, shown agency, courage, and loyalty rare even among people. I'd like to see whom she chooses. The clerk called Max, Jess, Evelyn, and, at Max's gentle request, a handful of rescued children who'd returned for the hearing. The bailiff led Juniper into the well of the court. For a breathless moment, everyone waited. Juniper's ears flicked as she took in the scene. She walked to Evelyn first, sniffed her hand, then stepped back. She paused in front of Jess, nickered softly, then moved on. When she reached the children, Juniper lowered her head so they could stroke her mane. But finally, the mare crossed to Max and stood, head bowed, pressing her scarred nose against Max's chest. The courtroom erupted in gentle laughter and a few tears. Even the judge wiped his eyes. It appears we have our answer. Custody is awarded to Sergeant Maxine Parker, with all due responsibility for Juniper's care. Relief washed over Max, sharp and sweet. The children clustered around Juniper, laughing and chattering, their faces bright with the kind of hope Max hadn't seen in a long time. For a moment, the courthouse felt less like a place of judgment and more like a sanctuary. But the work wasn't done. The prosecutor called Jess to the stand, asking about the bank records she'd uncovered. Jess explained how, in tracing the Boylan Ranch's tangled finances, she discovered a string of suspicious transfers, large sums funneled through shell accounts tied to the sheriff's family. The judge's face darkened with each new revelation. Years of cover-ups paid in blood and silence, he muttered. The sheriff himself was led in, handcuffed and sullen, to face formal charges, obstruction of justice, child endangerment, and conspiracy. As evidence piled up, the old wounds of the community surfaced, stories of missing kids, buried files, fear disguised as loyalty. But there was a crackle of something new, too. People began to look at Max and Jess, and especially at Juniper, with gratitude and pride. A few stood to testify: foster parents who'd lost children to the system, a teacher who remembered Sarah Mayfield's kindness, even the Boylan cousin, who admitted she'd never even met Juniper, and withdrew her claim to the horse. By the end of the day, the verdict was clear. Juniper was free. The surviving children were placed in new, loving homes, some of them adopted by the very families who'd fought for justice. The courthouse let out a collective sigh, as if the whole town had been holding its breath for years. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the rescued children surrounded Juniper, feeding her apple slices and braiding her mane with bits of blue ribbon. Jess and Max stood to the side, overwhelmed by gratitude and relief. "You think it's really over?" Jess asked, her breath ghosting in the winter air. Max shook her head, smiling. "It's just beginning. Juniper's done more than save us. She's given us a reason to hope again." Juniper turned her head, ears flicking as if she agreed. In her quiet, steady way, she'd become the heart of the community, a living reminder that justice and belonging sometimes arrive on four legs, with a battered hide and a heart that refuses to give up. That night, as the first stars pricked the Montana sky, Max led Juniper home. The barn was warm and filled with laughter, the rescued children helping to spread new hay, Jess hanging a fresh lantern above the stall. Max watched them all, heart full, knowing that for the first time in a long while, they were exactly where they belonged. Spring crept quietly into Montana, softening the hard ground and coaxing green shoots from beneath the snow. The air turned sweet and sharp, smelling of new grass, wet earth, and possibility. At the edge of town, what was once just Max's quiet barn and tired pasture had become something else entirely. Juniper's refuge, a place where second chances took root. It started with small changes. Jess painted a battered sign, bold blue letters on reclaimed wood. Juniper's refuge, sanctuary for horses and kids. The children who'd survived the Boylan tragedy came back on weekends, at first shy, then giddy and wild as colts, their laughter bouncing off the barn rafters. Word spread. Local families brought in horses no longer able to work, ponies whose riders had grown up and moved away, even a few elderly goats and battered barn cats who needed a soft place to land. Max worked from dawn till after dark, hauling feed, mending fences, and learning to let help in. Jess managed paperwork and built a small website, sharing their story online. Donations trickled in, then flooded, from people moved by Juniper's courage and the quiet miracle of what she'd helped create. The heart of it all was the big brown mare. Juniper still carried her scars, but her eyes shone brighter now. She patrolled the pastures, patient with new arrivals, gentle with children still learning to trust. Max watched her often from the kitchen window, marveling at how a horse so battered could become the anchor of so much healing. One afternoon, a little boy named Eli, once afraid of everything, quick to hide beneath tables, stood beside Juniper, hand buried in her mane. He whispered secrets into her ear, his fears dissolving with every nicker and nudge. Later, Max found a crumpled note in the barn. "I feel safe here because Juniper is brave for me." In the evenings, the barn bustled with life. Volunteers stacked hay bales, children painted the old tack room with murals of horses and wildflowers. Jess organized movie nights under the stars. Sometimes, families who had fostered kids or rescued horses would visit, drawn by a sense that here, at last, was a place where pain could be transformed into purpose. Max's favorite time came just before dusk. She'd walk the fence line with Juniper at her side, listening to the sound of laughter echoing across the fields. Under a spreading cottonwood, she'd sit with the mare and read the letters the rescued children had sent over the months. Some were short. Just a thank you or a sketch of Juniper's strong head. Others poured out heartbreak and hope in equal measure. "You taught me not to be afraid anymore. When I grow up, I want to help horses too." The ranch became a living symbol, a testament that even the lost and discarded could find a place to belong. Reporters wrote stories, and a local TV station aired a segment about Juniper's refuge, showing footage of the children riding bareback, faces split by grins, and Max leading Juniper through a field of wildflowers. The community, once wary and silent, now brought casseroles, fence posts, and blankets. People stopped Max in the grocery store to say how much the story had meant to them. But it was more than just the sanctuary that changed. Something deep within Max had shifted, too. Where once her days were filled with regret and old pain, now they were crowded with small joys. The smell of fresh hay, the shy hug from a child, the soft thud of hooves in the morning light. She found herself laughing more, trusting again, able to look at her reflection and see not just scars but strength. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of gold and lavender, Max sat beneath the cottonwood with Juniper, Jess, and several of the children. They shared stories, dreams, and quiet moments. The children braided wildflowers into Juniper's mane, and Max read aloud one of the letters from Sarah Mayfield, now a teenager, adopted and thriving in another town. "I don't remember everything from that winter, but I remember Juniper's warmth and your voice telling me I was safe. Thank you for believing in us when nobody else did." Jess squeezed Max's hand. The barn behind them glowed with lantern light, music and laughter spilling out. Juniper nuzzled Max's shoulder, as if reminding her that even heroes need comfort sometimes. Later, alone, Max walked through the quiet barn, pausing by each stall to check on every animal. She let her hand linger on Juniper's back, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat that had anchored so many lost souls. She understood now, true sanctuary was not a place, but a promise. To never turn away, to keep the doors open, to believe stubbornly in redemption. At the end of that long spring night, Max turned out the barn lights, stepped into the cool air, and let herself hope. The past had left its mark, but the future, here in the company of survivors and dreamers, felt wide open. Juniper, standing at the fence, watched the stars rise over the refuge she'd made possible. And for the first time, Max believed what everyone else already knew. Healing was real, and it had taken the shape of a scarred, beautiful horse with an unbreakable spirit. Summer in Montana is short and sweet, a brief symphony of wildflowers and golden light before the first hints of autumn sneak back in. At Juniper's refuge, everything hummed with life. Colts chasing each other in the grass, children weaving wild daisy crowns, volunteers laughing as they mucked out stalls. The place felt full, alive, complete. But beneath the joy, Max felt a quiet truth blooming. Juniper was slowing down. It started with little things, longer naps in the pasture, a reluctance to chase after the younger horses, the way she leaned a little heavier against Max when the evening came. The old scars stood out more against her sun-faded coat, and her clouded eye grew a bit duller. The children noticed, too, growing gentler in their touch, lingering longer with their brushes, whispering secrets as they hugged her neck. One evening, as the last light drained from the sky, Max sat beside Juniper, under the ancient cottonwood, the same tree that had become their sanctuary. She ran her fingers through the mare's tangled mane, remembering that first night in the blizzard, how a broken, terrified horse had changed everything. The children gathered around, sensing the moment was different. Even Jess, usually brisk and efficient, stood quietly nearby, watching with shining eyes. That week, a reporter from the local news station came to tell Juniper's story. Cameras rolled as Max spoke about rescue and hope, about the lessons she'd learned from a horse who never stopped believing in people, no matter how much she'd suffered. The segment aired across the county, and soon, letters poured in from strangers who'd found courage in Juniper's journey. But nothing could slow time. Max watched Juniper each morning for signs, sometimes hoping, sometimes fearing, but always grateful for one more day. When the end came, it was gentle. Juniper lay down in her favorite patch of clover, surrounded by the children, Max, Jess, and a chorus of soft voices singing her favorite lullabies. Max stroked her neck, whispering thanks for every moment, every lesson, every ounce of trust. As dawn broke, Juniper slipped away as quietly as she had lived, dignified, surrounded by love, leaving a silence so deep it echoed in every heart at the refuge. The children wept openly, their grief mingling with gratitude. Jess hugged Max fiercely, and even the barn cats crept close as if to pay their respects. Max built a simple wooden sign and placed it under the cottonwood. In memory of Juniper, the horse who showed us the way home. In the days that followed, life at the refuge slowly found its rhythm again. The animals still needed feeding, the children still needed stories. New rescues arrived, wounded and frightened, and Max greeted each one with patience, remembering how trust had to be earned and never demanded. Juniper's stall became a place of honor, adorned with flowers, letters, and tiny horseshoes crafted by the kids. No one spoke of moving on. Instead, they spoke of carrying forward, of living out the courage Juniper had modeled for them all. Max found herself reflecting on Juniper's legacy. The mare's story had never just been about survival, or even about rescue. It was about what happens when pain becomes purpose, when someone refuses to turn away from the broken. Redemption, Max realized, wasn't a grand gesture. It was 1,000 small kindnesses, a choice to show up again and again, no matter how hard or hopeless things seemed. One evening, as Max walked the fence line alone, she saw two children, Eli and Maria, helping a trembling new arrival settle into the barn. They spoke to the pony in soft, reassuring voices, using the same words Max had once used with Juniper. Watching them, Max felt the old ache in her heart ease a little more. That night, she wrote a letter to the refuge's growing online community. Sometimes hope finds us in the places we least expect. A barn in a blizzard, a scarred old horse, a child's hand reaching out for trust. Juniper taught us that healing begins with a single act of courage and grows stronger each time we choose compassion over fear. If you or someone you love has ever found hope in an unexpected place, share your story. Let's keep Juniper's spirit alive, for each other, and for every animal and person still searching for home. Messages poured in, stories of dogs rescued from highways, cats nursed back to health, grandparents who'd taken in troubled grandchildren, strangers who'd become family. Max read every word aloud under the cottonwood, her voice carrying into the twilight, letting Juniper's spirit ripple outward. Jess printed the best letters and tacked them on the barn wall. The children gathered around, reading them aloud to the horses, reminding each other that they were all part of something bigger, a legacy of belonging and bravery. The refuge thrived. Juniper's memory became the heartbeat of the place, a call to action, a reason to keep going. Each new animal brought a new story, a new chance for redemption. And every visitor, every child who brushed a mane or learned to ride, carried a bit of Juniper's lesson with them, that healing is possible and courage is contagious. Years later, when the children who'd once hidden in the corners of the barn grew up and returned to visit, they would gather under the cottonwood and touch the weathered sign. They'd whisper, "Thank you, Juniper. We found our way home." And so, in a world that often turned away from the broken, Juniper's refuge stood as proof that second chances are real, that even the lost can be found, and that the greatest journeys begin with one act of trust. Redemption and courage are for everyone. Healing begins with a single moment of belief. If you were moved by Juniper's story, like and subscribe for more true stories of resilience. And remember, somewhere out there, an animal is waiting for your act of kindness. Let's keep the circle unbroken.